Oh, I didn't see you there. Well, I suppose we're going to talk about RPGs, but before we get to that point, we need to first talk about definitions. Definitions are a little weird. Have you ever thought about that? About how we have this thing called a table, we use it all the time. Yet, there are plenty of things that don't quite fit into the category of table, but there are plenty of things that do. What is a table? Is a chair a table? Could you make a table in the shape of a chair? What is the shape of a table? How many legs does it have? Does it have legs? In our imagination, we can put together a vast number of possible tables. But when we come down to it, what makes a table a table? Some may say it's the function of the object itself is what defines it as a table. So a table is something that you can put things onto, but I don't know if that quite works fully for what we're getting at. And especially when we escape the example of a table, sometimes function isn't as obvious as we think. This sets us up perfectly for understanding how difficult a task it is to define a genre. Genres are even more vague and unexplainable and untangible, less tangible than something like a table or a chair. A genre, in a certain sense, isn't even a real thing. Physically, that is. In a sense, it just points to a pattern that we see in the world. In the same sense, we see fantasy. We associate certain ideas with fantasy, and then we see them play out, and then we develop an understanding of what people mean when they point to the fantasy genre. And because of this, genres don't have a definitive form. I imagine most people watching this video are experts in Wittgenstein already, so I totally understand that. But I have a very pitiful understanding of his philosophy. My general understanding of his theory is that we're often too analytical, and we often lean too much on these precise definitions that you'll find in a dictionary. Instead, a better route might be to identify a cloud of identity. That in the center is the ideal that could never exist, and outside of it are millions of examples of that thing that all differ in different ways, yet they all are closer to being the ideal thing than, anything outside of that cloud. For example, apples can be many different colors, but there are no apples that are neon pink. So by this, we have a more precise definition without having to fully define the range of colors that are possible for an apple. We identify these key attributes and we use them to kind of cut away at what is fully essential. And this should give us enough wiggle room to be a bit heretical and try to define this. So my goal here is we're going to take the RPG genre and we're going to try to find these essential attributes to develop a dynamic definition of what this genre even is. So I'm going to take 3 different levels of these patterns or themes that I see in RPGs and divide them into their essentialness. So at the very top we have the most essential, and at the very bottom we have the least essential. For the most part, this goes from like tropes down here to, relatively, you'll see them most of the time, and they're a little bit firmer than tropes. And then at the very top we'll have, if you don't have these, then it's really hard to conceptualize an RPG that fits into this. At our highest level of what it means to be a role-playing game, we have playable characters. Some games, such as management sims, don't have characters that you can play as. They tend to have some sort of disembodied spirit of government, like in City Skylines, where you just kind of do things to the people and you see the reaction. But role-playing games seem to be the opposite. You're fully embodied. You are a person in the world, or you're controlling people in the world. That's key to the genre. This character might be very well defined, or might be very flexible to how the player wants to act in the world. But it has to be a character. This can look like a lot of different things. You can be this hero destined to save the world, like Cloud, big sword and ready to attack. It may be that you're just a simple courier on a quest to get revenge on Matthew Perry for shooting you in the head. Either way, if there's plenty of choice or no choice, you are still playing a role in the story. And this brings us to our next pattern. At the center of every story, there is a seed of conflict. Something isn't as it should be, and forces fight to make a change. While, for the most part, in role-playing games, we're very familiar with the idea of battles between individuals, like rivals in Pokemon, or conflict between two factions, like in Bethesda games. But it doesn't mean we have to stop there. You can have conflicts with nature, trying to survive against the wildlife and not to starve. Conflicts with oneself, like in Y2K. Conflicts with spiritual and emotional states, like in Persona. Conflicts with gods, like in Final Fantasy. Conflicts with God, like in Final Fantasy. Conflicts with Satan, like in Shin Megami Tensei. Conflicts with God in Final Fantasy. And fighting literally uppercase G God in Shin Megami Tensei. This seems to happen way too often to be a coincidence. Our next essential pattern is that of resolution of these conflicts. Or you could also put this in terms of progression. Something that's essential in all role-playing games is some sort of arc or progression for characters or stories. A key feature of an RPG is that no character is static. Each is reacting dynamically to the events of the game and potentially the actions of the player. Depending on the game, some characters might leave your group based off of the actions that you make. This can play out in a lot of different ways. In some games, you have companions who decide to leave based off the decisions that you make as a player. And in other games, you're gaining experience based off of combat. All of these show a certain level of progression, both mechanically and then also story-wise. That brings us to the last of these essential themes and patterns that I see in RPGs, which is abstracted systems. Where the last three-ish might be considered something along the lines of the role play in role-playing games, this is the game of role-playing games. Why is it that we use numbers to define the strength of a character or their wisdom? Well, it's because we need some sort of abstracted system because it's too complex. We need something to simplify it down, to be able to articulate it and play it out. And so we need systems to be able to do that. Your character might have their physical and mental capabilities represented by numbers. Your aliveness might be represented by hit points. In the back of the game, there's constantly calculations going on, like whether or not you're able to convince anybody you actually care. If we were to break it down here, the force behind RPG is the roleplay in the game. It has to be a game to be an RPG, and it has to have role-playing of some sort. And the big debate is about what this piece is, and we will get into that into the future. The role-playing part is really hard to define, and so I hope to get into that later. In our middle tier, we have a lot of tropes that are really common in the genre, maybe more firm tropes. But I can see a case for all of these, that there are games that don't have any of these features. The first of these is a self-insert type of character. Most role-playing games have a character that you are expected to identify with throughout your entire journey. It's not like you just have a group of people. There's a character that you're probably customizing, taking a lot of time, being invested in, that you're making decisions through their head. That's just really common. Sometimes this is a predefined character, like the aforementioned Cloud from, that scene in Kingdom Hearts where, he's hitting stuff with that big old sword. Or it might be a custom character, like Tav. Or that definitely not suspicious Dream Guardian that just wants to put a worm into your brain. Speaking of worms and bugs, another one is combat. Combat is often how conflict plays out, but it doesn't always have to be this way. While some may love slinging bullets and others might like swinging hams. Disco Elysium shows us that, sometimes the best friends are the ones that you make inside your own head. And then when we consider combat, we often consider someone we need to fight against, and often that takes the form of an antagonist. Antagonists provide a clear foil to your path ahead, while some games may leave this ambiguous, like the dread that follows you around every corner. Some games decide that that dread should be a person that wants to make your life terrible. Doesn't that make you feel special? Last but not least, in the center tier, we have to consider what happens when we lose against the Wild Hunt or whatever. Losing a fight in most RPGs means the end, but that makes games like Dark Souls so subversive. They weave the undyingness of your character into the very lore and gameplay and meta-narrative that they're trying to communicate, as you are both literally and metaphorically cursed until you kill that stupid dancer. And last but not least, I want to talk about the lowest level, the things that, you know, are like the sprinkles or the chocolate icing on top. These are the things that are most firmly tropes, things that I love to see in all my role-playing games, but I can't bear to say that they're essential. First, we have fantasy. And what I mean here is not literally fantasy, like magic and dragons and cooking monsters for food, but more along the lines of a low level of realism. It's not very often that you see a role-playing game trying to reflect moments of our day-to-day life, but you're often thrown into an entirely different world, one that you can use as a metaphor for all your therapy sessions. Just like how Cynthia has just absolutely destroyed your childhood, like the existential weight that keeps pushing you down. Another one is random numbers. Random numbers is the spice of what makes every RPG great. I love the idea of being presented with just this random series of events and having to think on my feet and something I could never expect and provide a response and dynamically have this story being told between me and the game, especially when it's not just me in the game, right? D&D is the quintessential RPG, and maybe this answers the question from earlier, but the idea of sitting at a table and rolling a critical hit or critical miss and having all my friends around me react with me and cheer with me at my wins and groan with me at my losses, but be able to laugh through it nonetheless. This is just something that's core in my love for role-playing games. And last but definitely not least is choice and consequence. There's something about me that just loves the idea of making a choice and then just seeing it roll out before my eyes. Whether that's mechanically in a character build, or I'll spend too often and too long watching numbers go up in a little graph and seeing, I played too much Pathfinder lately, but just seeing my character grow into this plan that I had from the first moment I saw this character. Or it's narratively. Like, if you have not played the Red Baron questline from The Witcher 3, like, that's your homework. Your homework is to play The Witcher 3 and get to that point. And see some of the greatest, you know, easy to access storytelling in games in a while. While I don't put as much weight as others do on character aesthetics, I love the ability to take my character in any gameplay direction that I want. And when this goes right, it goes perfectly right. Dark Souls, you can take this one weapon that looks so weird and define your whole personality around it. And just put it at the core of your build and just make it work. When it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. Like the 1000th time, you promise I'm not going to play a stealth archer, but you do. You still play a stealth archer. To recap, this is the cloud that I would put RPGs in. You know, if I was forced with a gun on my head to say a short, witty definition of what an RPG is, I'd say essentially it is a series of mechanics used to facilitate the act of participating in a story, with all the fun stuff that I've just been talking about for the last little bit, all sprinkled in like fudge ripples. That's it. This is how I would define RPGs if someone asked. I'm trying my best to avoid the whole Plato's man situation. If you're unfamiliar with this story, it goes that Plato was asked to define what a human being was, and he tried to break it down to the simplest he could, and he said, human being is a hairless biped. So Diogenes, the great troll that he was, he proceeded to take a chicken, pluck it, and presented it to the crowd, saying, "Behold, Plato's man." And, you know, I think there is a chance that someone's able to take my definition and say, you know, chess is an RPG. And you know what? Fair enough. If that happens, let me know. But I think this is a good exercise just to kind of fully understand how these genres work together and what goes into it. Please leave a comment if I missed anything major. I feel like I covered a lot of my bases here, but I'm sure someone can catch it. I'm hoping to make a lot more videos on RPG soon about this whole genre and exploring different pieces of it, both in history, but then also just how it plays out philosophically. I think is super interesting, and so I'm hoping to do that. So please subscribe if you want to see more of those in your feed. If not, you know, that's nice too. But thank you all for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next Saturday.